So without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Natasha Williams. Natasha, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for having me today. So, what we'll do is let's get started and let's talk about stress, anxiety, and COVID 19. So, definitely a heavy topic, but also I think something that needs to be addressed so that we can figure out and start to put the pieces together in terms of how to navigate through this time. So, what's interesting is let's talk a little bit about what stress is. So we all talk about stress, but we're not always clear about what stress is. Stress can come from things that are good or that are bad, things that happen to us. So now if we didn't feel any stress at all, we're as good as dead. We are not alive. But the thing is that stress can be overwhelming at times. So, what we want to look at are what are some of the strategies to help you take control of your stress. So, stress is the body's response to a real or perceived threat. So, the response is meant to get people ready for some kind of action. Now, what's interesting with our bodies is that once we respond to that type of threat or action to get us out of danger, what our body is supposed to do is go back to a homeostatic state. So we're not supposed to be at that elevated level for a significant period of time. But as human beings, we are programmed to what we call either fight or flight or freeze, but have that ability to respond during those times of stress, but then from there go back to, again, what I'd mentioned, which is a homeostatic state. But most of the threats people face today aren't something that we can fight or run away from. What we're wanting to look at in terms of coping with stress is these threats are usually things that we have to work through instead of trying to avoid. So when stress is unhelpful, a lot of times we feel overwhelmed, that we do not have the resources that we need or that are within us to possibly fix the problem. So a lot of times what we do is instead we avoid dealing with the initial problem altogether. And a lot of times that makes the problem worse and it increases the stress. So some of the symptoms that you'll notice when you are under extreme stress or an elevated level of stress for a significant period of time is that it can be very difficult to concentrate, difficult to make decisions, and it's hard to feel confident when you're feeling a lot of stress. Other times, you're going to notice some physical sensations that are connected with that elevated stress, like sweating, your heart racing, or tension in your muscles. So, a lot of times, stress, which is significant over a long period of time, can also impact your physical health. You'll also notice some other signs, such as difficulty sleeping, headaches, and a lot of times your immune system ends up being suppressed or compromised. So if you are stressed for a long period of time, what you may notice is that you may be more likely to become sick when you're experiencing a lot more stress. So stress is the reaction to the situation. It isn't usually about the actual situation itself, because a lot of times two people can be in the exact same situation but react differently. So we're looking at the reaction and not the actual situation itself. We usually feel stressed when we think that the demands of the situation are greater than the resources we have to deal with that situation. Next slide, please. So if we look at now stress and sort of its relation to anxiety, now anxiety is our body's natural response to stress. Now, anxiety, though, complex emotional state. Now, this occurs when a person or somebody anticipates that a future situation, event, or circumstance may involve something that's going to be personally distressing, unpredictable, and an uncontrollable threat to his or her vital interest. A lot of times we employ what we call the what ifs, and we're trying to prepare ourselves for something that might be personally distressing. So some of the symptoms of anxiety that you'll notice, it will depend on each individual. Each individual is going to be slightly different. So these are some of the general symptoms of anxiety, but it doesn't mean that everyone goes through them. So some of the things you'll notice will be an accelerated or increased heart rate. You'll notice rapid breathing, restlessness or being irritable or jittery, difficulty concentrating or being able to focus, and difficulty falling asleep. So putting these things in its context and talking about this pandemic going through, we're all trying to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic across the world. So we've got so many people that are dealing with different symptoms, including anxiety, including stress, worry, possible panic, and fear. And that's because something like this is unprecedented. We have not gone through anything like this before. What's adding to a lot of the uncertainty is that the information is constantly changing because we're getting new information every day. We're trying to understand how this virus is working, how it's impacting, how are we, contracting this virus. So a lot of things are changing constantly. And the virus is the primary focus of most people at this time. So here are a few tips that I hope will be helpful for everybody as we're trying to navigate through this pandemic at this time. The first thing is that I do not want you to punish yourself for how you're feeling. There is no template, no manual in terms of how we're supposed to be feeling during this. So being worried, fear, anxiety in these times of uncertainty are absolutely normal. So please don't punish yourself for experiencing all of these feelings. During these uncertain times, what we may have to look at is how do we become flexible in the ways that we're thinking and dealing with these situations. What I love to call it is how do we learn to pivot? Now, when I say that as an example, usually what I do is that I had a very set routine before this COVID-19, and I would go to the gym. I would wake up in the morning. I usually wake up about 5:36 in the morning. I would go to the gym. I would work out. I would then shower and change, and then from there I would head off to my office or head off to one of the satellite clinics. But for me, it wasn't only about my physical fitness, but also it allowed me to become mentally prepared for the day ahead. And having that routine was something that I had in my life for a significant period of time. As this pandemic started to unfold, one of the first things that they did was close a lot of businesses, including the gym. And man, when that happened, my routine went, was up in a loop. It was like, I don't know what I'm going to do now, because my main outlet for how I used to deal with myself physically as well as emotionally and mentally is closed. So for me, what was important is how do I learn to pivot? How am I flexible in the ways that I'm going to be able to cope and still be able to maintain my health? So what I decided was a couple of things. The first thing is that I live near a park, and I never really took advantage of it. So when the weather is decent enough for me, I'm not a huge person or fan of the cold, but if it's decent enough, I will go outside, I will go to the park. We're talking about physical distancing, which means that, during the times when the park didn't have too many people, and it still doesn't really have too many people, I would be able to take a run in the park. The other thing is that I also transformed a space in my home so that I can do workouts online. I also had a trainer, and she made sure that she converted her one-on-one training with me to an online platform. So I was able to do that as well. So it's just a small example, but what I wanted to do was I initially, put my hands in the air and I was like, oh my goodness, the gym is closed. What in the world am I going to do? But that turned into, how do I shift my thinking and shift into this new reality for a while so that I could still receive all of those benefits? The next thing is that it would be perfect for you to take this time to focus. Can I ask you to go back to the slide, please? Yes. So I'd love you to take this time to focus on your own personal wellness. So again, remain active, go outside for fresh air. The parks, so some of the smaller parks might be closed, but you may have a larger park where you'll be able to engage in that physical distancing and still be able to walk around and get some fresh air. Look at the foods that you're consuming. Look at looking at, your nutrition, being able to increase the nutritious foods that you eat to take care of your body internally, and monitor your sleep as well. That also is going to be very important. The next thing you want to do is seek your information from a trusted, secure source and limit the consumption of that information. A lot of where the anxiety and stress and worry comes from is how much of this information are we consuming. So much of it is coming from, news and from social media and all of these kinds of things that it can be overwhelming. So what will be important is looking at a trusted source of your information and limit the consumption. So for myself, I decided that in the morning, I may just, put on what we call CP24 so that I can get a bit of information, and then I turn off my television and I limit the amount of time I am on social media, because all of that can really be overwhelming. So while we are now asked to engage in social distancing, keeping ourselves anywhere from, they say, 2 feet, 6 feet apart, it does not mean that we have to be emotionally isolated. So we're looking at how do we find different ways to still stay connected. There are several social media outlets that we can use, as well as different platforms. The good old-fashioned phone call. I try to call my dad at least a couple days a week. Different platforms for video chat. So I know they talk about Google Hangouts, Zoom. So a lot of different platforms where we could still stay connected with friends and family, where we can still look at not being physically close by, but we can still remain emotionally connected. The next thing is that while most mental health professionals are discontinuing face-to-face interactions, many mental health professionals, including myself, we're available via telephone or online, telepsychology or telepsychiatry for appointments. So if you're feeling significantly overwhelmed and you want to reach out to a professional, reach out to that mental health professional for support. A lot of us are using these different platforms to still be able to engage with our patients. And one of the last things I would love to leave with you is to increase your community kindness. A lot of times when we are feeling overwhelmed, the one thing we can do is reach out and be kind to somebody else. So that would mean maybe check on your neighbor, see how your neighbor is doing, call your parents as an example, just to connect and to stay connected. If you're going grocery shopping, picking up a couple of groceries for a friend and do the appropriate drop it off on their porch or in a way that you can still remain socially distant. But at the end of the day, being able to help others with acts of community kindness can increase that solidarity as we're navigating through this uncertainty of COVID-19. Thank you so much.